The controller module I pulled in the last lesson fires pressed and released events for each button, as well as a move event for each of the axis controls. Since the D-pad is essentially a collection of buttons, I'm going to add an event handler for the pressed event just above the controller.init line I just added. Inside this new handler, I will move the tank in the direction corresponding to the button that was pressed. So if the up button is pressed, I will move the tank forward. If the down button is pressed, I'll move it backward. If the left button is pressed, I'll turn it to the left. And of course, if the right button is pressed, I'll turn it to the right. The controller module passes the name of the button that triggered the pressed and released events as an argument to any of the attached event handlers, so in order to know which direction to move the tank, I need to add a button name parameter to my handler function. Next, I'll add a switch statement using the button name to handle each of the up, down, left, and right buttons. When the up button is pressed, I want to move the tank forward, so in this block, I will tell both the left and right motors to move forward by calling the FWD function supplied by Johnny5. The FWD function is really just an alias for the forward function, so if you want to be a little more verbose and spell out the word forward, you can certainly do so as well. The 255 that you see in the parentheses is the speed. The range of valid values is 0 to 255, where 0 means the motor should be stopped, and 255 means the motor should run at full speed. Of course, if you're just getting started and don't feel comfortable with 255 here, don't worry, it's really not that fast, then you may try running the motors at about half speed, which means you'd specify a value of 127 instead. Now, whenever the down button is pressed, I'd like to move the tank in reverse, so for the down case, I'm going to tell both the left and right motors to move in reverse by calling the rev function with a speed value of 255. Now, just like how FWD is an alias for the forward function, rev is actually an alias for the reverse function, so you can use a more verbose function name here as well if you choose. Now, the next case in my switch statement here is for when the left button is pressed on the controller. Of course, I want to move the tank to the left in this particular case, but in order to do that, I need to leave the left motor stationary and move the right motor forward. I don't actually need to call a function for the left motor to stay put, as it should already be stopped whenever this case is hit, so I can simply just add rightMotor.fwd255. And for the final case, I want to move the tank to the right when the right button is pressed, so similar to how I handled the left case, I need to leave the right motor stationary and move the left motor forward. Now, before we give this a test run, I want to point out that whenever the forward and reverse functions are called, the motors will continue moving in those directions until you explicitly tell them to stop. So as it stands now, if you press the up button, for example, then the motors will continue plowing forward even when you release the up button. Now, that really doesn't seem like an ideal situation, so in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to stop both of the motors whenever a button is released.